one thing. Welcome to In the Light with me, Anna Isabel. I am a clinical hypnotherapist and past life regressionist. And I have a colleague with me today. I have Steve Burgess, who is the author of The Power of Past Life Regression. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me.
So now it's, I guess the best first question to ask is, can you explain what past life regression involves?
Yeah, sure. The model of regression in therapy is that all of our issues as human beings come from locked in feelings and emotions from past traumas. And what regression usually is about, in most cases, is going back in time to relive and re-experience the traumas so we can release the traumatic energy, the fear, the anxiety, the guilt, the sadness, the anger that has been locked inside us as a result of past events. So in regression, we're aiming to take our clients into trance, into a hypnotic state, and allow their subconscious mind, you could say their higher self, to take them back to relive traumas and release traumas. So there are actually three areas that I regress into. I regress clients into this present lifetime, into past lifetimes, and into our ancestors' lives. So for me, though, the most important aspect of regression, and I believe of therapy, is past life regression, because that means going back into lifetimes before this present life to relive and release traumas from past lives that it's like we bring the energy of those traumas into this present life with us. And then without realizing, subconsciously, all day long, we are reacting to those traumas without realizing, by getting depressed, by being anxious, by having a lack of confidence, and any issue that a client can bring to the consulting room potentially has its causes, has its roots in a past life. And it doesn't matter what the problem is. It can be a sexual issue. It can be an addiction problem. It can be nail biting. It can be whatever. So every issue that we have potentially is caused by locked in feelings from the past. And so often it's past lives where these traumas come through from.
Can you explain a little bit about what the hypnotic state is? Because some people are very wary of it. So can you describe what it is?
Yes. So most people think that it's something weird or strange, or they've seen it in the movies, or of course they've seen stage hypnotists, which are generally perverting the beauty of the hypnotic state. Hypnosis is completely natural. We all go into hypnosis, we call it trance, at least 24 times a day. So when we daydream, when we go on automatic pilot in the car, when we're drifting into sleep and we're drifting out of sleep, when we're focusing on a movie or into a book, all these trance states, these are states where we alter our consciousness. And instead of being our usual sort of heads all over the place, we are focused into something. And trance is quite simply a focused state of relaxation, really. So I tend to say to clients, think relaxation and you're on the right track. So it's not sleep. It's probably better to say what it isn't it? It's not sleep. It's not going into a coma. It's not being under anesthetic where you don't know what's going on. It's not being under the control of the therapist. What it is a focused inner state, which usually has a sense of relaxation attached to it. Then everybody can go into hypnosis because it's such a natural process. So all the Hollywood stuff goes out the window. It's just a gentle state of relaxation for most people.
Now, I just add that the reason it is so powerful is because it is a combination of focus and relaxation. There's something about that state which helps to create new neural pathways, which means learning can take place at a much deeper level than just by having a conversation. So this is why it's so powerful. Do you distinguish between the level of relaxation for doing work on regression for events that happen in this life, and then regression for past lives? So I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel that people have to be in a deeper state of relaxation the further back they go?
No. And it's often thought that that is the case. And I mean, old-fashioned hypnotherapists would be trained to get the client as deep as possible. But actually, it's not important. The depth of the trance is not important. And of course, there are some people who are naturally hypnotizable. About 25 to 30% of people go into trance very easily. And usually that's a person who's a natural hypnotic ability. I call it an ability to go into trance. Usually with that ability, they can be just in trance within 2 or 3 minutes. And after 4 or 5 minutes, they may be back in a past life. So the depth of the trance isn't important. It really relies very much on the client's ability to be in trance and their desire to be in trance as well. So as you know, we can't work with people who resist us all the time. We can, but it's much more difficult. So yeah, it's just a question of taking somebody in, and because trance is natural, letting the client's subconscious take them in a way that's right for them. And then we just tend to be guiding clients back, sometimes visually, sometimes what we call kinesthetically. It depends on the client's abilities as well.
It does. And, you know, there are people who find it very difficult to see. Because they find it difficult to see, they get into a little bit of a panic about whether they're imagining things or not, because they can't see it. But it's a different way of working, isn't it?
I'm non-visual, so I cannot visualize to save my life. If you ask me, if I go into trance and you say, just imagine yourself on a beach and just visualize the beautiful waves and the sand, I just get an orange blob. Whereas somebody who is, people who are very visual, be able to imagine grains of sand spilling down between the fingertips. I can't do that. So I tend to specialize working with non-visual people, and I call it working kinesthetically. And which basically means going back in regression to release the traumas and the emotions and the energies without the client even seeing what's going on. And it can be very dramatic. I mean, some clients, you know, are really crying or screaming or yelling sometimes as they release the stuff, but it's extremely effective. So it isn't, we don't have to see the past life. We don't have to see what's happening. We don't even have to understand it. The most important thing is getting back and releasing the energy.
What would you say to people who are concerned about reliving traumatic events? Because it's not exactly fun to stir this stuff up, is it?
It isn't. And I often say to my clients, this may not be fun. It's not often a fun process. As long as it's done properly, then it's safe to do it. If it's not done properly, then there's a possibility that a person can be re-traumatized. But as long as the therapist allows the release to take place and releases the energies and the emotions, the client will get better. Now, that sometimes means going back more than once into events in the past. And if I can give you an example of this, for example, I had a lady who came with severe back pains, and these were mystery back pains. Doctors couldn't work out what was happening. She'd even had surgery where they'd wheeled her into hospital and put her under anesthetic and opened her up. They couldn't find anything wrong. So they just stitched her back up and gave her painkillers and sent her home. But she was constantly in pain. She got to the stage where she couldn't go to the gym anymore because the pain was too much. So she started to put weight on. So she was getting depressed because she was putting weight on and the pain was there. And she was recommended to come and see me. And this was in the old days when I was still working face-to-face with clients in my office. And this is the other thing, because a lot of people say with past lives, everybody who comes to see you, they're just believing in past lives already. No, they're not. This lady was a magistrate. She was no fool. She's not into all this stuff. This is not part of her mind frame. But I asked the subconscious about the causes of the problem once I'd taken her into trance, and it indicated there were 4 past lives that were causing the back pain. And the first past life was the big one. And what she did, she relived the past life as a Nazi soldier in the Second World War. And she was a young male Nazi soldier, a very naive young man, very sensitive young man, who was forced to enter the military because of his nasty father. And he became part of a team, a Nazi team because he was artistically inclined. He was going around various places in Europe as the Nazis overran different cities and places. And he was stealing art treasures and getting them shipped back to Berlin. So he was part of a team of Nazi art experts, you could say, who were stealing art treasures and getting them shipped back to Berlin. And this is quite a cushy number, really, for that young man. But then things went wrong, and he gets sent off to the Eastern Front, and he's then fighting in Russia in the deep snow. And my client was laying in the chair with her eyelids closed, just talking. This stuff's just coming through her, just talking. She's just telling me what she's seeing, what she's feeling. And this young man's then terrified. She said, "We're stuck in the snow. The trucks are stuck. There's no supplies, can't get through. We can't move on. We can't move back. The Russians keep attacking us from time to time. We're about 40 miles from Moscow." And this young man was terrified. She was shaking as she laid in the chair. But then what happened is this young man was told about an icon in a church behind the Nazi lines. It was in a village that they'd captured. And he was told that it was worth looking at this icon because they might want to steal it and, again, taking it back to Berlin. And what that young man then did, he made the biggest mistake of his life. Without an armed escort, he jumped on a motorbike and he drove about a mile through the snow down the country lanes. He thought he was safe because, it was a village that they'd captured, and arrived at this little Russian village in the middle of nowhere with all these little old wooden buildings and wooden huts. And so I said to my clients, I said, "Well, okay, what's happening?" And she said, "Well, I've got off the motorbike." And she said, "It's completely deserted. There's nobody around. I found the church. I'm walking into the churchyard. And then suddenly she screamed and she jumped about 3 feet in the air and landed with a crash back in the chair and started coughing and choking and coughing and choking." And I said, "So what's happened?" She said, "I've been shot. I've been shot. I'm dying." And this death went on for about 20 minutes. And then she died. And what I will say is a lot of past life therapy is about releasing death trauma. So much past life work is releasing death trauma. So she died, passed into spirit. Now, what I then did is I took her back through that same death scene another 3 times. The second time when the bullet went in, she screamed again and leapt 2 feet in the air and then crashed, and she took 10 minutes to die. The third time when the bullet went in, she jumped a foot in the air and it took 5 minutes to die. The fourth time when the bullet went in, she just coughed and had died immediately. That back pain was then completely cured. And guess where the bullet went? She was shot by a sniper, basically. He was in the village waiting for anybody. Shot by a sniper, left to die. The bullet went straight exactly where the back pain is in this life. So she released the energy. We did other work on the other past lives and stuff. The back pain was completely cured. So why I'm saying that is this has to be done properly. This is deep and serious work. And if a therapist doesn't take the client back through the trauma enough, then the trauma will still be there. And then they'll feel really rubbish for days after a session. So if it's done properly, it's incredibly safe and really, really effective. For me, the most effective form of therapy that I know.
Yes, I understand. Sometimes listening to clients recount these stories, and then reading your book, it never ceases to amaze me how gripping it can be, because it's like, I guess what I'm thinking is, it's like being in the middle of a film, watching a film, because the stories are so dramatic and fantastical.
Mm.
And then you realize, actually, this isn't a story. This actually happens to someone. It goes beyond story into history, and the history of humanity unfolding as we listen to our clients. And the reason that we have the luxury in this life of not having as many traumatic stories is purely because we have been living in a fairly quiet period in history.
Yes.
But when you listen to the stories that our clients are recounting, we are reminded of the fact that our souls have a completely different experience, which can encompass 2, 3, 4 traumatic lives. Now, it doesn't mean that every life we live is traumatic. It's just that those are the ones that we tend to hear, because they're the ones that are causing a problem. Do you get that?
Oh, sorry, you just broke up there, Anna. Sorry, just Anna.
Do you have that sense of awe when you're listening?
Yes, it is quite extraordinary. I sometimes say to a client at the end of a session, if we'd have sat down before this session and said, look, let's talk about your flying phobia. If you were going to write a story from a past life, what would it be? And it would never have been anything like the experience that they've had in the actual regression session, because it's just so true. It's so, as you say, gripping and so intense. And it makes so much sense as well. And then, of course, you have some clients who will get historical information that they can go away and verify, although that doesn't happen too often, because my role is to get the client better. I'm not interested all the time in verifying things. But the stories are just amazing. And as you know, it's almost a privilege to do this job at times, to have a client who will come in and I had a young lad who had migraines, for example. And as we know, every physical problem has emotional causes. But he had migraines, and he was 13. And his mom sat and watched the session. And this is a 13-year-old boy, by the way, so he's not into past life regression and reincarnation and stuff. He just wants to get his life back together because he's off from school sick every 3 or 4 weeks with these awful head pains. I so often find with migraines that the causes of the migraines are deaths in past lives where there have been blows to the head. And this young lad, there were 8 past lives causing his migraines. Excuse me. And we worked through all 8 past lives in one session. And this is pretty fast working, because for some clients that would take 8 sessions to work through. But in one session, and virtually everyone was a death. So I can't remember the order, but he went into the first past life. And he was a man who was standing in his garden in the past life, and his wife was having an affair with his best friend, and she wanted to get rid of him. So she came up behind him with a spade and she smashes him round the back of the head and kills him, and he falls to the floor dead. And then he went straight into the next past life where he was a soldier in a battle, and somebody comes at him with an axe and they smashed him through the head and he falls down dead. And he moved into the next past life where he's a man driving a car, and suddenly a truck smashes into the side of the car and he smashes his head on the steering wheel. This was maybe in the 60s, before seatbelts were used very much. Smashes his head into the steering wheel and he's dead. And then he went straight into the next past life, was an old man climbing up an old wooden ladder, and one of the steps gives way and he crashes down and lands on his head dead. And he went into the next past life where he's a man in a bar, and he gets involved with a bar fight in the bar, and they start to kick him in the head as laid on the floor, and he's dead. And then he went into the next past life where he's a boy at school, and he kicks the school bully. So the school bully gets hold of him and starts smashing his head against the wall. And his mom has to come and take him to hospital, but he dies on the way to hospital, etc., etc. I can't remember how many of his that is now, but there were 8 past lives. Virtually all of them, if not all of them, were about blows to the head. He worked through them all in one session. We released the energy of it, and his migraines were completely cured. So, when people say this is all imagination, why did a 13-year-old boy imagine that? Did he come to please me? He didn't know anything about past lives. He was just told that this bloke might be able to help him as a therapist. But his subconscious knew where to go. It took us where we needed to go, and it released the problem, and he got better.
Now, that puts me in mind of repetition of patterns, as you just described, 8 past lives in which the means by which the person dies is exactly the same. Are you conscious of patterns repeating themselves?
Yeah, very much so. And it's so often the case with relationships. We're around the same people life after life in different ways, but we're often repeating the same patterns and emotional patterns with those people over several lifetimes. And although I've said that a lot of regression work is about releasing trauma, another wonderful aspect is when a client becomes aware of the patterns, or they get an understanding of why the problem is in this life, because it's come from past lives. And when they have that understanding, they then get better. Very often the client will say, so there's no wonder my mother doesn't like me, and she's never loved me, because in that past life, I killed her. Oh, it all makes sense. Of course it makes sense. And that understanding, then that brings the healing. But sometimes it's just we're doing the same thing life after life, and suddenly we realize in therapy, well, I better stop this now. And once the client is aware of that, they can stop the pattern and they can make the changes in the life quite easily that they need to make. And often the problem just dissolves away.
So there is a common misconception about karma, that it's about retribution.
Mm-hmm.
You do something and then you experience that was done to you again in the next life.
Yes.
That's a small part of what happens, isn't it?
Very much so. And it's not about retribution at all, because there's no such thing as retribution. It's just about doing things over many lifetimes and eventually getting things right and learning more and becoming more pure, you could say, as a soul, and with deeper understanding, and then eventually being able to step off this cycle of death and rebirth. But there's no retribution. For example, I can't categorically state this, but I don't believe that there's such a place as hell. Excuse me, because in 15,000 therapy sessions, in thousands of past life regression sessions where my clients have died and they've gone into spirit after death, I've not had a single person mention hell. So as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist. It was created by the Catholic Church to frighten people. So it's not about retribution. It's about growing as a soul over many, many lifetimes, so that eventually we don't have to keep coming back into all of this nonsense that we go through on Earth.
So here's the good news. You get it wrong, you get to do it again.
Yes, of course. The wonderful thing is, though, Anna, as I'm sure you know, for me, the great spiritual awakening, which is happening on Earth right now and has been happening for the past 20, 30 years, is quite extraordinary. So more and more people are becoming aware, excuse me, more and more people are becoming aware of their karmic destiny, if you like, that we can step off this cycle, that we can grow our souls, and that at some stage then we don't have to keep coming back to the nonsense.
I think what I've been thinking in the last little while about this sense of awakening is how traumatic so much of the 20th century was for so many people. And I have a sense that means that there are a lot of souls who experience that and who came back in the latter part of the 20th century, and of course since, and so that there's been a quickening of experience and soul learning, perhaps, and that could be contributing, hopefully, towards a better understanding.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, Anna. That really does resonate with me very deeply. There is certainly a quickening. And, when we do regression sessions, the number of people who died in the First World War, died in the Second World War, who are now being able to move on now and to grow, is certainly happening. I mean, I've been around a long time, and I've never seen anything like this. The last 20 years is just remarkable and spectacular in terms of spiritual growth and spiritual awakening.
And that is a beautiful note of hope on which to end our conversation. So if people would like to get hold of you, Steve, how could they do that?
Okay, well, I have a couple of websites. My main one is lionheart-training.com. I do have another site, a WordPress site with a lot of my blogs and podcasts on, and that is hypnoblogpod.wordpress.com, hypnoblogpod.wordpress.com. I have a Facebook page which is called, after the book, The Power of Past Life Regression. But I also like, if I may, just to mention my free YouTube channel, which has free hypnotherapy recordings on it, because I like, I want to give hypnotherapy away to the world. I want people to be experiencing hypnotherapy and its beauties and its effectiveness. So my YouTube channel is called Hypno for All. That's HYPNO, the number 4, ALL, Hypno for All. There are 21 recordings on there for all sorts of issues and problems, for relaxing, or for irritable bowel, for childbirth, for weight loss, just so that people can experience some hypnotherapy and hopefully get some benefits. So if nothing else, for people out there, if they're not even interested in buying my book, then go on my free YouTube channel and experience some lovely hypnotherapy.
And the book that we've been talking about is The Power of Past Life Regression. And this has been Steve Burgess talking about it with us. And so next time, we are going to be talking about anxiety and how to deal with anxiety. And thank you very much for joining us today, Steve. And thank you all for watching. Please do remember to subscribe and like and share, and join us again next time. Until then, goodbye.